The clock read 5:42 a.m. when the silence of the Vatican was interrupted by discreet movement. Inside his chambers, Pope Francis, visibly weakened, watched the sunrise with a serene yet restless gaze. There was no longer any doubt among the doctors. His health was rapidly declining. But even in the face of death's proximity, Francis seemed to carry an unfinished mission. He asked everyone to leave the room, except for a trusted advisor and the person responsible for direct communication with the Vatican. With a soft yet determined voice, he requested a phone and made a request that no one could have imagined. "I want to call Donald Trump." The room froze for a moment. Pope Francis and the former President of the United States had never maintained a close relationship. On the contrary, their views often publicly and forcefully diverged. But there, on the brink of death, the Supreme Pontiff revealed a purpose that transcended any ideological or political differences. He wanted to say something big, something urgent. The phone was handed to him. With difficulty, the Pope personally dialed the numbers, refusing help. When the call was answered, a pause of seconds stretched like an eternity. On the other end of the line, a familiar voice responded, "Hello?" And then, with a choked voice, the Pope said, "Mr. Trump, this is Pope Francis. I need to make a request to you, the most important of my life." It was early spring in Rome. Flowers were blossoming in the Vatican gardens, but within its walls, the atmosphere was one of silent expectation. In the marble corridors, bishops and cardinals exchanged discreet glances, respecting the silence imposed by the delicate moment. Pope Francis's health had suddenly deteriorated. The world did not yet know, but the leader of the Catholic Church was facing his final days. Francis, born Jorge Mario Bergoglio, was no longer the energetic man who had won the world with his humility and charisma. At 88 years old, his body showed signs of exhaustion, but his mind and spirit remained clear. In recent months, the Pope had been deeply reflecting on his legacy. In particular, an unease accompanied him day and night. The future of humanity in light of so many political, social, and spiritual divisions. In an increasingly polarized world, he watched with concern the rise of hate speech, the advance of extremism, and the lack of genuine dialogue among peoples. Spirituality seemed suffocated by ego, greed, and power, and it was precisely for this reason that his recurring thoughts fell on a controversial name, Donald Trump. On the other side of the Atlantic, Trump was experiencing a new moment of public exposure. After leaving the presidency of the United States, he had maintained his active influence, becoming a central figure in the global political debate. With increasingly firm speeches, he was adored by millions and simultaneously harshly criticized by many others. Francis saw in him not an enemy, but a key, a piece that, if touched wisely, could change the course of many events. Meanwhile, within the walls of the Vatican, the Pope was doing something unusual. He spent hours reflecting on people who, theoretically, did not belong to his circle of affinity. He read old speeches by Trump, watched interviews, and requested intelligence reports on his actions in recent years. His advisors were astonished by the intensity of this interest. The decision to call Trump directly was not made impulsively. It came after sleepless nights, deep prayers, and a final breath of faith. Francis believed that if he could touch the heart of that man, something grand could happen. He did not want to leave this life without planting one last seed. When he decided to make the call, he already had in mind exactly what he would say. It was a message of peace, but also of responsibility, a spiritual provocation, but without imposition. He did not want to convince Trump to change. He wanted to awaken him. The stage was set. On one side, the most popular pope of the 21st century at the gates of eternity. On the other, one of the most controversial and influential men of our time. And between them, a phone and a conversation that no one could have ever imagined witnessing. On the other end of the line, Donald Trump was silent for a few seconds. That measured, slightly weakened voice, yet still full of authority, left no doubt. It was indeed Pope Francis. "Your Holiness, I wasn't expecting this call," Trump said, visibly unsettled. "I wasn't expecting my time to run out so soon either," the Pope replied with a hint of melancholic humor. "But when it runs out, the soul begins to see more clearly." The conversation continued in a respectful yet tense tone. Trump, known for his assertive and often impatient demeanor, seemed to be trying to understand what motivated that phone call. But Francis was direct. "Mr. Trump, my life is coming to an end. And before I go, I have one last request. Not for me, but for the world." There was a long pause until the Pope revealed, "I want you to use your influence, your voice, to promote a global gathering for reconciliation. I want to see leaders of different ideologies, religions, and nations sitting at the same table, not to negotiate power, but to talk about peace, forgiveness, and commitment to those who suffer the most." Trump did not respond immediately. It seemed surreal. A global gathering, with adversaries, opponents, leaders of hostile countries. The idea seemed utopian, and he, a man known for direct confrontations, was being invited to lead reconciliation. "You're asking me to be a peacemaker?" he asked with a slight ironic smile. The Pope did not hesitate. "I'm asking you to be the instrument. Not for me, but because the world needs someone to break the pattern. And sometimes the unlikely are the most capable." It was as if those words had struck something within Trump. For years, he had been seen as a symbol of polarization, both by his allies and his opponents. But there, in front of the fragility of a man about to die, he heard a request that transcended politics, fame, and even religion. "Why me?" he still insisted. "There are religious leaders, pacifists, even Nobel laureates who could do this." Francis replied calmly, "Precisely because they don't expect this from you. Because the most powerful transformation is the one that comes from where no one believes it is possible." The conflict was set. Trump, caught between his pride and the possibility of changing history. The Pope, in his last days, placing his faith in someone who had never been on his side, and the world still oblivious to what was about to happen. Donald Trump hung up the phone without saying yes or no. The call with Pope Francis had ended with an enigmatic phrase from the pontiff. "Sometimes the most unlikely seed blooms in the most arid desert." In that moment, Trump remained still in his office, looking out the window of Trump Tower, while the world continued its frenetic pace. Outside, the news spoke of armed conflicts, political divisions, climate crises, and corruption scandals. Everything felt like distant noise after that unexpected dialogue. In the following days, he tried to ignore the impact of that call. He continued with his meetings, his public appearances, and his firm speeches on national security and economic freedom. But something was different. During a press conference, he froze for a few seconds when the Vatican was mentioned. In an interview, he stumbled slightly when asked about dialogue between nations. His aides noticed something had changed. Meanwhile, at the Vatican, the news of the call began to leak. Initially a rumor among cardinals, it soon reached the Italian press. Headlines proclaimed that the Pope made direct contact with Trump before dying. The Vatican neither confirmed nor denied it, but the buzz grew. This generated two immediate reactions: speculation and resistance. Conservative religious groups saw the Pope's gesture as a sign of weakness, negotiating with the symbol of American individualism, while social activists, on the other hand, felt hope. If that request were real, and Trump accepted, it could be the beginning of something great. Pressured from all sides, Trump found himself at the center of an unexpected storm. His closest allies advised him to ignore it. "Don't get involved. It looks like a trap. This goes against your strong image." But he no longer listened with such conviction. One night alone, Trump revisited old videos of Pope Francis, speeches about love for others, meetings with refugees, visits to prisons and hospitals. He saw the humanity of a man, who, despite so many ideological differences, never stopped trying to unite. The dilemma took shape. Trump was faced with a unique chance to rewrite his narrative in front of the world. But at the same time, this would require him to renounce part of the character he had built for decades. The tough guy, the one who doesn't yield, the one who wins through confrontation. Then something even more unexpected happened. The Vatican, in a surprising gesture, issued a vague but powerful statement. In recent days, His Holiness spoke with an influential figure in the contemporary world. The message was clear. The world needs reconciliation. Time is short. The internet exploded. Hashtags like Papal Request were Trump for Peace and Reconciliation now dominated the networks. Millions of people began to comment, speculate, cheer and criticize. Suddenly, the fate of world peace seemed to rest in the hands of a man who had always been synonymous with verbal war. Trump realized that, whether he wanted to or not, he was at the center of a game bigger than himself. And for the first time, he seriously considered accepting. Not out of fear, not out of vanity, but because deep down, that tired and faith-filled voice had planted something inside him. The idea that perhaps, just perhaps, there was still time to do something truly grand. Something he never imagined he would be capable of. On the morning of April 12th, the world woke up in shock. Donald Trump called an emergency press conference in Washington, surrounded by flags of the United States, but curiously, also by flags of countries with which he had maintained harsh rivalries in the past. The atmosphere was one of tension, curiosity, and anticipation. Cameras turned to him as silence preceded his first words. "A few days ago, I received a call that changed everything," he began, looking directly into the lenses without reading any speech. A call from a man whom until then I considered a distant adversary, Pope Francis. Social media exploded instantly. The confirmation of the call from Trump's own mouth generated a whirlwind of emotions. But he continued, "The Pope, in his last days of life, asked me for something no other leader has ever dared to ask: to unite the opposites, to sit with enemies, to dialogue with rivals, to extend a hand where there was once confrontation." A dramatic pause. Trump took a deep breath. For a moment, I thought it was madness. I thought he didn't know me. But then I understood that perhaps he knew me better than I knew myself. Because he did not speak to the politician. He spoke to the man. The audience's silence was absolute. That's why I announced today the holding of the Global Meeting for Reconciliation. An international event with religious, political and social leaders from all spheres that will take place in 30 days on neutral ground. It will not be about treaties, nor about ideologies. It will be about something we have forgotten: humanity. Reporters struggled to hold back tears. Advisors, incredulous, looked at each other as if witnessing a statue move. Trump spoke from the heart, something extremely rare. And there was more. And I want to make it clear, this is not about me. It's about a man who, even while ill, chose to spend his last strength believing in what no one else believed. If Pope Francis saw in me a chance for collective redemption, then perhaps I should find that as well. At the end of the press conference, Trump left a sealed envelope on the podium. Inside was a handwritten letter from the Pope in his shaky handwriting, confirming the request. It began with the words, "Donald, you have always been a symbol of strength. Today, I ask you to also be a symbol of reconciliation. You can choose to leave the world with more walls or with more bridges." The news spread around the world in minutes. News programs interrupted their broadcasts. World leaders spoke out, some skeptical, others hopeful, but the fact is that Trump had done the unthinkable. He accepted the call. And more, he took the lead on something that transcended ideologies and borders. The outpouring of emotion was immediate. People on different continents began organizing vigils, prayers, and support groups for the initiative. Young and old, religious and atheist, began to wonder if even Trump was touched. Can we change too? And as the world reacted, inside a quiet room in the Vatican, a man smiled for the last time. The news of the global gathering for reconciliation spread like wildfire. Within hours, embassies around the world began receiving official invitations to the event. The chosen location was Geneva, Switzerland, a symbol of historical neutrality. For the first time in decades, leaders of conflicting countries agreed to sit at the same table, not driven by self-interest treaties, but by a symbolic call for peace. The involvement of the United Nations was immediate. Secretaries General and representatives from the Vatican began coordinating logistical and security details, while humanitarian organizations united to support the event with global structure and mobilization. Churches, mosques, synagogues, and temples from different religions offered to participate in a global day of prayer for reconciliation. Trump, in a gesture that surprised even the most skeptical, temporarily suspended his political activities and embarked on preparatory meetings with former adversaries. On television, the world watched images of him shaking hands, previously considered enemies. The gesture did not erase his past actions, but indicated a real movement for change. Meanwhile, in the Vatican, Pope Francis's health rapidly deteriorated. But upon hearing Trump's public announcement, he requested to be taken to the balcony where, for so many years, he had blessed crowds. There, with the help of 2 assistants, he looked toward the horizon and, in a faint voice, murmured, "The seed fell in the right soil." And there, before a silent Rome, he made his last sign of the cross. That same afternoon, the Vatican flag was raised alongside the American flag in several capitals around the world, not as a symbol of power, but as a sign of mutual respect. The Pope's mission, even silent and invisible to many, had provoked something real. And although no one knew what the future would hold, for the first time in a long time, there was a thread of hope stitching together nations, leaders, and hearts. 5 days after the announcement of the global gathering, the world received the news it had already feared. Pope Francis had passed away. St. Peter's Square, usually filled with tourists, transformed into a silent sea of candles, tears, and prayers. Religious leaders and ordinary citizens from all over the planet paid tribute to the man who, even in his final moments, chose to plant peace. Donald Trump, upon hearing of the Pope's death, appeared before the cameras with an expression he rarely showed: vulnerability. Today, the world loses a light, but that light ignited something in me. And for that reason, I will continue what he started, he declared with tear-filled eyes. On the day set for the meeting in Geneva, thousands of people gathered outside the conference. But the most symbolic moment happened when Trump took the stage, and before he began his speech, he pulled a small envelope from his pocket. It was the Pope's letter, the original, yellowed with age, with shaky handwriting. He read the last line aloud. "The true hero is the one who can listen to the other, even when everything inside him screams to shout." There was absolute silence, and then applause. Long, emotional, sincere. That gesture, simple yet loaded with meaning, showed that even the most unlikely can change, that the most improbable bridges can be built, and that, even in departing, the Pope had left something more powerful than speeches or doctrines, a living choice. And for millions around the world, a new certainty emerged. As long as there are those who listen, there is still time for peace. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our upcoming emotional stories. Stories like this show us that even in dark times, acts of courage, humility, and reconciliation still have the power to transform the world. Share this video with someone who needs to believe again in dialogue, empathy, and the possibility of change. Leave in the comments, what would you do if you received a request like this? Do you believe that the unlikely can also become instruments of peace? Your participation is essential for us to continue bringing content like this. Real stories or inspired by facts that make us reflect on who we are and who we can still be. Be part of this chain of good. Like, comment, share, and inspire others with this message. After all, as Pope Francis said, it is never too late to build a bridge where there once were only walls.